Harry's interview with Anderson Cooper is unbelievable from a body language perspective. Let's take a look.
Why not renounce your titles as Duke and Duchess?
And what difference would that make?
One of the criticisms that you've received is that, okay, fine, you want to move to California, you want to step back from the institutional role. Why be so public? Why reveal conversations you've had with your father or with your brother? You say you tried to do this privately.
And every single time I've tried to do it privately, there have been briefings and leakings and planting of stories against me and my wife. You know, the family motto is never complain, never explain, but it's just a motto. And it doesn't really hold.
There's a lot of complaining and a lot of explaining.
Endless.
Private being done through leaks.
Through leaks.
All right, Chase, what do you got?
First, we're presented with this classic line from the documentary of how you'd be surprised what people will do so with for money. The irony there is crazy. Now with even more irony, Harry's talking about people who would go to the media to complain and explain while he's going to the media to complain and explain. And I don't think this could be any better. And there's some body language in here. I'll leave it to you guys. But there's an emotional accessing. And Greg will probably explain this better than I can. But he gets emotional around saying these words, never complain, never explain. Maybe you can educate me why that happens down in the comments. Greg?
Yeah, I think there's nothing new here. We've seen this guy for so long. There's a ton of details coming out. So I'm not going to cover the body language except for a very small part. And I will cover that eye accessing cue, Chase. But there's nothing new. Before body language, I would say this guy has some fractures. When you think about a pearl, if you've got a fracture and you just keep laying layers on top of it, you still got a cracked pearl. This guy's a cracked pearl. So the best compliment I can usually pay a person is they're cohesive in their thought. This guy's either stupid or really comfortable in cognitive dissonance. I'm going to give him the benefit of a doubt and say stupid. That's number one. Then I'm going to say I don't think he's brilliant, and maybe he's just got poor processor. I don't know what the hell's going on with him, but as I watch him, I keep paying attention to him. Why would you want an award that was granted by the very organization you despise? We see it all the time with peer-granted awards where people are peer-granted and they hate the people who are granting them because they don't feel fair until they get that award. It's in hobbies. It's everywhere. So that leads me to think if he's stupid, he also is arrogant and he's entitled. We know that by watching him. I call that the trifecta to become a pawn. And he's quickly becoming a pawn. Has no idea what's going on with him. So we got that trifecta. He does a tongue jut and disdain as he's talking about exactly that. Chase, and by tongue jut, we push something out. Disdain, we pull our face up. And you're right. He goes to downright eye accessing to say complain and explain. And his blink rate goes through the roof when he's challenged. I don't think he expected this. And in my Army days, I would say people have been pounding sunlight up your rear end so long you think you're a flashlight. I think that's what we got. Mark, what do you got?
Yeah, let's drill into it even more, what he's thinking and maybe feeling around complain and explain, and that what he calls the motto there. So he says it's just a motto, and if you slow down just after that, you'll see contempt. That's when the side of the mouth, one side of the mouth comes up. That suggests that he is against that value in some way, or that he believes that that value is hypocritical. It's probably the latter. Probably that he's going, look, that's hypocritical. There's also an eyes narrowing. That's one of the signals of anger as well. So he's angry about this. There's contempt around that. And then the eyes close as well as he moves back slightly. I would put that down to rejection. So he's rejecting that motto. He's angry and contemptuous around how hypocritical he feels it is. But of course, Chase, to your point, it's kind of the irony is a little too thick to even be believable around that. It's hard to believe he doesn't know the irony that's going on there. Maybe he does, maybe he doesn't. Maybe we'll find out further along this. Scott, what you got on this one?
I like this at the beginning because he looks like he's listening. He's doing the classic where you lean forward a little bit and get one ear toward that person and you kind of look at him like you're listening. So I think he's handling that well. I think that might be part of how they train them to do interviews, how to look like they're listening, how to be involved. Then we hear this fading facts when he says, what difference would that make? Because I think you're right, Greg. I don't think he was ready for this. I think he probably got a list of questions because quite often they'll do that. So we're going to do it, but what are you going to ask? He may not have seen that coming because I think you're right. It catches him off guard. Then we start hearing those sniffs again. Now there are a series of sniffs through this thing. And the last time on the last video we did, everybody thinks this cat's gacked out on blow. And it's like, no, he's not. He's got like some kind of a cold or something. I think he's taking an antihistamine that finally kicks in when the sniffing stops in a couple of videos. So that's my take on that. I don't think he's on drugs or anything. I still don't think that. So there's that. Now, another thing is these tongue juts, or are these tongue juts, whatever is grammatically correct. We see tons of these. I think I stopped counting at 12 as we go through this. There are a couple of ones like the one you're talking about, Greg, where they're actually juts that mean what we know them to mean. The rest of them, he's just licking his lips, and it's part of a grooming thing, because I think he's probably on an antihistamine, and it's drying his mouth up, so he keeps licking his lips. And again, when he puts his finger up to his nose and sniffs, that's classic. I've got a cold, or I've got the sniffles. So I think that's what we're seeing there. Yeah, so I'll leave it there. All right, we're good.
Yeah, actually, just let me back you up on that one, Scott, in that people have said, oh, but look at the dilated pupils. Well, pseudoepinephrine creates dilated pupils. So, you know, and that's probably what he's taking to try and dry up that sniffle.
And over-the-counter, not only over-the-counter prescription drugs, there are many that do that have to do with attention and that kind of thing. So that could be any of that.
Strong coffee will do that.
Why not renounce your titles as Duke and Duchess?
And what difference would that make?
One of the criticisms that you've received is that, okay, fine, you want to move to California, you want to step back from the institutional role. Why be so public? Why reveal conversations you've had with your father or with your brother? You say you tried to do this privately.
And every single time I've tried to do it privately, there have been briefings and leakings and planting of stories against me and my wife. You know, the family motto is never complain, never explain, but it's just a motto. And it doesn't really hold.
There's a lot of complaining and a lot of explaining.
Endless.
Private being done through leaks.
Through leaks.
Do you speak to William now? Do you text?
Currently, no. But I look forward to us being able to find peace.
How long has it been since you spoke?
A while.
Do you speak to your dad?
We haven't spoken for quite a while. No, not recently.
Can you see a day when you would return as a full-time member of the royal family?
No, I can't see that happening.
In the book, you called this a full-scale rupture. Can it be healed?
Yes, the ball is very much in their court. But, you know, Meghan and I have continued to say that we will openly apologize for anything that we did wrong. But every time we ask that question, no one's telling us the specifics or anything. There needs to be a constructive conversation, one that can happen in private, that doesn't get leaked.
I assume they would say, well, how can we trust you? How do we know that you're not going to reveal whatever conversations we have in an interview somewhere?
This all started with them briefing daily against my wife with lies, to the point of where my wife and I had to run away from my country.
It's hard, I think, for anybody to imagine a family dynamic that is so Game of Thrones without dragons.
I don't watch Game of Thrones, but there's definitely dragons. And that's, again, the third party, which is the British press. So ultimately, without the British press as part of this, we would probably still be a fairly dysfunctional family, like a lot are. But at the heart of it, there is a family, without question. And I really look forward to having that family element back. I look forward to having a relationship with my brother. I look forward to having a relationship with my father and other members of my family.
You want that?
That's all I've ever asked for.
All right, Mark, what do you got?
Okay, great. I'm glad he mentions Game of Thrones. As many people know, I don't watch it. He doesn't watch it. Well, that's where myself and Harry align. It's probably why he doesn't quite understand what Clarkson says. And we'll find out about Clarkson, what Jeremy Clarkson says a little bit later on in this. However, let's have a look at some real fundamental nonverbal, which is how people are dressed. And what really comes across to me in this is that the interviewer and the subject here are dressed exactly the same, apart from different colorways. You know, it's like they've gone to the same store, and I'll do the brown one, you do the blue one. You know, what does that mean, if anything? Well, We know, even if that's not a decision, that if people are dressed the same, they are more likely to get on better with each other. Of course, there's outliers to that, of course, but as a good general rule, they're going to get on better. So here's what I'm going to say about this interview right from the start is I'm not expecting much conflict here between the interviewer and the subject. We may get some little bits, but I'm expecting this to be a more helpful interview rather than a one with conflict in it, simply off the bat because of how they've shown up dressed very much the same, either in arranged manner or it's just happenstance. Very different from the interview that ITV with Bradby, the political editor, where there is a lot of conflict in that. Maybe we'll do that. Maybe we'll do that. And they are not dressed exactly the same. Greg, what are your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, so right out of the gate, he conditions a question. When he's asked if you've spoken to your brother, he goes to a long vowel. He goes to internal voice, meaning that long vowel, longer than his normal consonant or vowel is. That vowel is stretching. His eyes look down into his left. We typically associate that with internal conversation, and he navigates that response and conditions a question. You mean currently? No, I mean yesterday. Come on, don't be dumb. And then he rambles, and he shows disdain for the situation. When I say disdain, contempt or disdain, you see his mouth draw back when he's talking about his brother and his father. I think he really does have some baggage associated with that. When he's asked whether or not he's going to be back in the royal family, I don't think it should take him very long for him to answer that because he's got little control over that. I think he has done something that they are going to put pressure on him. Then there's a softening and a blink rate increase that tells me that something internal is going on as he thinks about it. And then he uses a word that I don't think he should ever use, and that is specifics. In the famous words of Mandy Patinkin, I don't think a word means what you think it means. I don't think he's ever used a specific in anything. Chase, you were all over him in the last one. So there's more dissonance. Then he talks about them leaking information. How much more dissonant can you be? How much more cognitive dissonance can you have than saying my family outed words about me and writing a damn book and doing a tour on it? Now, when they might have done it, let's assume they did. They did it through the media. Okay, bad media. You can always guess whether that's right or not. The minute you raise your hand and say, here's what really happens, everything changes. Then you get him when he goes to that emotional eye accessing, when he's looking forward to meeting or having the family back. He's downright. He's in that heavy emotional eye accessing. Scott, what do you got?
All right. When he says, when he's asked about his dad, we see almost a micro expression of anger because we see the teeth and lips. We see part of his mouth go up on this side. Then we see the tongue jut. That's tongue jut number 4. And that out of the 12, after I stopped counting the 12. Then we take into consideration the situation is emotional. So that's why I believe that we're seeing body language wise, him stiffen up a little bit. Usually in situations like this, you'll see a lot more facial expressions with that emotion, but I think he's trying to hold that in. When he says, will you return to the royal family? And he says, no, he gets quieter at that point. So I think he was probably ready for that question. I think he knew he'd be asked that. We see another tongue jut there. Then after his open arms thing where he says, we'd apologize, we see tongue jut number 6. And during the explanation of that, we see number 7. I want to quit counting them. When he says, this started daily against my wife, we haven't heard one of these. What have they said? He's not saying what they said. But this really bothers me because I try to pay attention to what he's doing behaviorally, his body language, but I don't get what's happening here. I really don't understand what's happening because he's talking about something. I don't know if it exists or not. When he says British press, we see that chin up. You come out a little bit, a deep breath, and that would indicate anger and probably frustration at the same time. We're also seeing the bottom teeth in that section there, so that indicates anger. His blink rate plummets in there as well. Hey, Chase. Sorry.
That's good. This is a very emotional thing. I think the emotion centers around these specific points. So what Greg was talking about a little bit ago, the eyes move in these different directions to access different types of memory. Not every human being is a copy paste of each other, but there are a few things that are semi-universal. The biggest one is when someone looks down and to their right. And I think this indicates or suggests they're accessing emotional feelings and memories. And you can try this right now if you like. But what we're seeing here is Harry doing this exactly when he's contemplating both the relationship with his brother and his father. And this movement isn't common for him. And this suggests he's very emotional about this, which I did not expect to see. Two things you'll see here in this clip. There's uncertainty in his belief about whether or not there will ever be some restoration within the family. His voice and gestures communicate uncertainty about this. Second, he's essentially saying that once they admit he's right, he will return and peace will be back. And I think it's good to see royalty isn't above the pettiness that we see in other people in everyday life.
Do you speak to William now? Do you text?
Currently, no. But I look forward to us being able to find peace.
How long has it been since you spoke?
A while.
Do you speak to your dad?
We haven't spoken for quite a while. No, not recently.
Can you see a day when you would return as a full-time member of the royal family?
No, I can't see that happening.
In the book, you called this a full-scale rupture. Can it be healed?
Yes, the board is very much in their court. But, Meghan and I have continued to say that we will openly apologize for anything that we did wrong. But every time we ask that question, no one's telling us the specifics or anything. There needs to be a constructive conversation, one that can happen in private, that doesn't get leaked.
I assume they would say, well, how can we trust you? How do we know that you're not going to reveal whatever conversations we have in an interview somewhere?
This all started with them briefing daily against my wife with lies to the point of where my wife and I had to run away from my country.
It's hard, I think, for anybody to imagine a family dynamic that is so Game of Thrones without dragons.
I don't watch Game of Thrones, but there's definitely dragons. And that's, again, the third party, which is the British press. So ultimately, without the British press as part of this, we would probably still be a fairly dysfunctional family, like a lot are. But at the heart of it, there is a family, without question. And I really look forward to having that family element back. I look forward to having a relationship with my brother. I look forward to having a relationship with my father and other members of my family.
You want that?
That's all I've ever asked for.
You write about a contentious meeting you had with him in 2021. You said, I looked at Willie, really looked at him, maybe for the first time since we were boys. I took it all in. His familiar scowl, which had always been his default in dealings with me, his alarming baldness, more advanced than my own, his famous resemblance to Mummy, which was fading with time, with age. It's pretty cutting.
I don't see it as cutting at all. My brother and I love each other. I love him deeply. There has been a lot of pain between the two of us, especially the last 6 years. None of anything that I've written and anything I've included is ever intended to hurt my family. But it does give a full picture of the situation as we were growing up. And also squashes this idea that somehow my wife was the one that destroyed the relationship between these two brothers.
I think so many people around the world watched you and your brother grow up and feel like you two were inseparable. And yet in reading the book, you have lived separate lives from the time your mom died. Mm-hmm. Even when you were in the same school, in high school.
Sibling rivalry.
Your brother told you, pretend we don't know each other.
Yeah, and at the time it hurt. I couldn't make sense of it. I was like, what do you mean? We're now at the same school. Like, I haven't seen you for ages. Now we get to hang out together? He's like, no. When we're at school, we don't know each other. And I took that personally. But yes, you're absolutely right. You hit the nail on the head. Like, we had a very similar traumatic experience. And then we dealt with it two very different ways.
William tried to talk to you occasionally about your mom, but as a child, you couldn't respond.
For me, it was never a case of, I don't want to talk about it with you, I just don't know how to talk about it. I never ever thought that maybe talking about it with my brother or with anybody else at that point would be therapeutic.
All right, Greg, what do you got?
Yeah, I talk about this all the time, but organisms do what make the organism successful. And all I mean by that is it's gotten them to the point they are. It doesn't mean that it's always healthy. I mean, it can be a badly fractured organism that just keeps laying over layer after layer after layer. And when you're a prince and you can't be challenged as easily, you can probably get away with a whole bunch of stupid stuff. And we know he did get away with a whole bunch. Then there's more dissonance when he's saying, no, it's not cruel, it's not harsh, it's not mean. Well, what would you say if he said those same things about you? What would you say there? Then when he says love each other, watch that body language. There's lilt, and he requests approval. This is what I call request for approval. I'm asking you a question, and I raise my brow to see that you're responding. You see it when he says, we love each other, unlike the rest of his comments. And then there's a sneer on the side of his face there. And now, sometimes that means nothing. If you were to go and look at most of my Hartley family, that's a smile. It's just a one-sided smile, and a lot of them do it. But he doesn't. So there's something up when he does that one-sided smile. And I think it's amused disdain, because you see his eyes are alight, all that thing's going on, but he's got disdain as he draws his face back. Then he goes to more emotional eye accessing, looking down into his right as he talks about his teen years. Look, dude, you're 40. That was 12. I get your mom, all that. Your brother's going through stuff. You need some counseling? I'm not the guy. But I think you need some counseling. You need some way to fix that, because you got unresolved issues that are overlaying. This is one of the rare times you'll hear me mention tense, because I think often people are uneducated, poorly educated, may use tense and shift tenses randomly, but that's not the case with him. When he's talking about the back and forth between him and his brother in high school, he goes to present tense. That means it's fresh and it's a wound. Got to fix that. Chase, what do you got?
So I'll skip most of the body language and go straight to maybe the narrative of this. And what you're witnessing from the last video, the documentary, to this interview, is the mentality that we saw in the Amber Heard trial. And the formula for success is pretend to be perfect, admit no fault. And even his apologies are, I'm sorry for everything, but I've done nothing wrong and no one can tell me what I did, but I'm sorry. It's a victim apology. So step 2 of the Heard protocol would be to exaggerate the wrongs of everyone else and then make it look like them or they are even worse than you are. And then it elevates me. It brings me up because they are so bad. Step 3 is to explain away all bad behavior on his part by saying it was an attempt to help, an attempt to explain something, or to stop something bad from happening. And the mistake here is that while he's trying to pretend to be perfect, you fall out of character too often. The one psychological reason people are fascinated with the royals is that their faults make ours kind of seem like they're okay. And I think that's what a lot of people like seeing a lot of those things about. Scott?
All right. He's back to his listening pose. And I call it a pose because I think he's used to doing that. He's set up and said, I'm going to look like I'm listening. So, and that's, again, when you bring one ear forward, you lean a little bit and look like you're listening. When he talks about his brother, you're right. We see that contempt and that I think it's jealousy. I think he's got a problem with his brother. He knows he's never going to be the king. So his brother's always had they both had their hind ends kissed their whole life, but I think his brother's had his kissed a lot more than his has been. And I think that bothers him. I think that might be the root of a lot of this. Of course, his mom dying, that triggered a lot of it. But I think that's the biggest thing here. We're hearing the strongest and the most consecutive tone of voice through the whole thing. It's the volume is loud, the tone is good, and the cadence is a little bit fast. Now, when we say cadence is how fast someone speaks. Mine is sometimes erratic because I try to get out everything I'm thinking about, and it speeds up and it slows down, it speeds up and slows down. Greg's is always just boom, boom, boom. And then Chase's is pretty much just the same cadence every time. Then Mark's is more of a fluttering cadence. It's sort of, it moves around a lot. So, but it stays, but the tone stays strong in all of these. So in his, this is the first time we've heard it stay strong the whole time. Same volume, the same, it sounds the same. I don't know how to explain any differently than that, but the roundness of his tone remains the whole time. Mark, what do you got?
Yeah, let me just focus on one piece of body language because we're going to see it throughout. We've already seen it in every video so far, and I think we'll see it many, many times. And that's the contempt or disdain, and it's this upturn in the mouth. We'll see it on one side sometimes, and the other side another time. It's asymmetrical. Sometimes we'll call it contempt because we think it's about an individual. Sometimes we might call it disdain because we think it's non-acceptance of a group or an idea. But the what happens on the face is exactly the same. And we see it repetitively with Harry throughout this. And Chase, to your point about Amber Heard, we would see it with Amber Heard repetitively. Now, you can draw your own conclusions as to why we're seeing the same thing. Is it a personality type? Is it a situation? Could be a number of things. Could be all of those things. But certainly, it is amazing that we see this consistent level of contempt and or disdain throughout this interview. Now, let me go a little into the choice of words and the images that it produces, because from my point of view, that's what I would call non-verbal as well, or paralanguage. It's certainly part of the language, but it builds a picture outside of just the words themselves. Destroyed relationship, not shattered, not broken, destroyed. If you destroy something, you cannot put it back together. If it's broken, you can put it back together. If it's fractured, if it's shattered, you can piece it together. Destroyed is gone completely. So it's interesting that he uses this idea of destroyed relationship, and then goes to these two brothers. So total distancing, not us. Yeah, he completely distances himself and sees them, these two brothers, as an image outside of his own relationship. So based on that alone, I don't see with his language how they would ever get back together, even though he's saying, hey, all they need to do is apologize and say I'm right, and then we're all good. I don't see it. Here's something else. I really looked at him, he says, but all he sees is negative external ideas around age, fading resemblance to the mother, and scowling. So negative emotions, encroaching incapacity, let's say, or encroaching non-virility, and not being part of the genetic code, the good genetic code of the mother anymore. The interviewer says, well, that's pretty cutting, because it is. I mean, with the best will in the world, I don't think there's anybody on the planet who's going, no, I think that's actually quite kind of factual. But he won't see that at all. He won't address what everybody else will reasonably see. What kind of person do you know that will never address what everybody else will reasonably see in front of them? Again, we've seen that kind of behavior from Amber Heard as well, not being reasonable about what everybody else might be seeing.
You write about a contentious meeting you had with him in 2021. You said, I looked at Willie, really looked at him, maybe for the first time since we were boys. I took it all in. His familiar scowl, which had always been his default in dealings with me, his alarming baldness, more advanced than my own, his famous resemblance to Mummy, which was fading with time, with age. It's pretty cutting.
I don't see it as cutting at all. My brother and I love each other. I love him deeply. There has been a lot of pain between the two of us, especially the last 6 years. None of anything that I've written and anything I've included is ever intended to hurt my family. But it does give a full picture of the situation as we were growing up. And also squashes this idea that somehow my wife was the one that destroyed the relationship between these two brothers.
I think so many people around the world watched you and your brother grow up and feel like you two were inseparable. And yet in reading the book, you have lived separate lives from the time your mom died. Mm-hmm. Even when you were in the same school, in high school.
Sibling rivalry.
Your brother told you, pretend we don't know each other.
Yeah, and at the time it hurt. I couldn't make sense of it. I was like, what do you mean? We're now at the same school. Like, I haven't seen you for ages. Now we get to hang out together? He's like, no. When we're at school, we don't know each other. And I took that personally. But yes, you're absolutely right. You hit the nail on the head. Like, we had a very similar traumatic experience. And then we dealt with it two very different ways.
William tried to talk to you occasionally about your mom, but as a child, you couldn't respond.
For me, it was never a case of, I don't want to talk about it with you. I just don't know how to talk about it. I never ever thought that maybe talking about it with my brother or with anybody else at that point would be therapeutic.
In the book you write, he says, "They tried, darling boy. I'm afraid she didn't make it." These phrases remain in my mind like darts in a board, you say. Did you cry?
No, never shed a single tear at that point. I was in shock. You know, you're 12 years old, sort of 7:30 in the morning, early. Your father comes in, sits on your bed, puts his hand on your knee and tells you there's been an accident. I couldn't believe.
And you write in the book that Pa didn't hug me. He wasn't great at showing emotions under normal circumstances, but his hand did fall once more on my knee and he said, "It's going to be okay." But after that, nothing was okay for a long time.
No, nothing was okay.
Harry says his memories of the next few days are fragmented, but he does remember this, greeting mourners outside Kensington Palace in London the day before his mother's funeral.
When you see those videos now, what do you think?
I think it's bizarre because I see William and me smiling. I remember the guilt that I felt.
Guilt about?
The fact that the people that we were meeting were showing more emotion than we were showing. Maybe more emotion than we even felt.
They were crying, but you weren't.
There was a lot of tears, and I talk about how wet people's hands were, and I couldn't understand it at first.
Their hands were wet.
Their hands were wet from wiping their own tears away. I do remember one of the strangest parts to it was taking flowers from people and then placing those flowers with the rest of them, as if I was some sort of middle person for their grief.
All right, Chase, what do you got?
Let's talk about the speech here. This level of speech, if you listen back to this, is self-absorbed and self-centered speech that fits the definition of what that is. The fault here is in his father for not hugging him. His father came in his room, touched him, placed a hand on him, talked to him, but it's his fault because he didn't get hugged. The fault is also in the public. It's the people's fault for making him this middle person for their grief. And right when he's talking about these people doing this, when he's talking about the public, he even shows a micro expression, which is a very brief facial expression that is almost impossible to fake, and it's almost impossible to conceal. And it kind of reveals a true emotion that's happening under the surface. It's a microfacial expression of disgust when he's talking about all these cheerful, happy people who came here to see him, to say hello, smiling at him. And there's disgust there with that. I'll let you be the judge of why, where that comes from. I don't know. I'm no expert on the royals. I wish we would stop doing these videos on these people too. Greg, what do you got?
Greg, you love him. What do you got?
Yeah, I'll drink to that. Yeah, so when I watch the guy, I think he's reliving all this stuff. I don't think he has moved on. I think he's still dealing with it, and however he deals with it, that's his issue. Look, you lose your mother at 12, certainly there's going to be some trauma, but the very nature of human life is trauma. When I watched this thing, all I could think was Mark always says the royals are there as surrogates for lots of reasons. And Mark, I'm sure you'll cover it. And, last time I said I have no desire to live in a place that has a monarchy. That doesn't mean I have any disdain for a monarchy. Just I prefer this. And when you've got a monarchy, that system is very complex. I mean, if you look at my bookshelves back here, most of that is English history in the first couple of bookshelves, and how complex that is because of all the changes that have occurred. When you start pulling on those threads, that's pretty damn dangerous. When you start trying to figure out, can I do away with this piece? I think he's reliving it. I think he's angry with his family, with his father. You see when he goes 12 years old, he does a contempt move. The right side of his face draws back in contempt when he's talking about his dad coming in, talking to him at 12 years old. I think you see a lot of animosity. I think he's got a lot of pent up stuff here. When he goes to do data intake, it's the first time we've seen him do it. When the guy's asking him questions about his dad, and then he withdraws his lips and he does an Amber Heard. He bites the inside of his mouth. First time we've seen that adapter. This has got some power. I would poke and lean. And, I would say an interrogator is an anxiety broker. I would not make it easier for him. I'd make it harder before I made it easier for him in exchange for what I want. That's the way it works. I'll leave it at that for a second. And Mark, I'll let you take it from there.
Yeah. Again, 4 for 4. We get more disdain. Now, is it? I think he's specifically talking about the guilt that he feels there, and we see this disdain come in. So is it disdain or is it contempt? Could be contempt for himself, because he says that he wasn't feeling the emotions that others were feeling. And just to that point, Greg, the royal family can be a channel, an avatar, a somewhere that the public push their emotions, their joy and their grief through. And so it's a hard position to be in. Absolutely. It's a position that most of us don't ever get to be in. So yeah, very hard for him. But this narrative is being fed to him by the interviewer. After that, nothing was okay. No, nothing was okay. Just repeats what the interviewer is feeding him from his own book. So again, it's an easy interview. If it were a less light and easy interview, I would hope that that we would get more interrogation as to exactly what actions that he's talking about, exactly what they meant to him. Here's my example of this. He says that his father didn't hug him. Well, yeah, I mean, that's either good or bad or something in between. But to know if it's good or bad, we have to go, so what did that mean to you? What did you want at that time? What did you need at that time? Yeah. And how did your father deliver that or not deliver that? Because in the imagery, I see the father behind him looking at the flowers. I'm looking at the flowers, and I see the father put what looks to me as to be a quite consoling and tender hand on his son's shoulder. So, but that's to me, I go, okay, that looks quite loving, what's happening there. We have to ask questions. We have to go, what did that mean to you when that happened? What did you want? And therefore, was this really deficient? Because as ever, Harry is leaving it up to our imagination as to what the feeling was, what the intentions were. He's inferring ideas, but he's delivering no data whatsoever about what truly happened for him or others. It's devoid at the moment of real meaning, unfortunately. Scott, what do you got on this one?
All right. I think this is fairly odd what we saw at the beginning there when he's talking about the most important thing that ever happened in his life, the most traumatic thing that ever happened in his life. He's smiling. He goes on and talks about it as you're sitting on the bed, you're doing this, you're doing that, separating himself from all that. And I think he's smiling to sort of protect himself. I think he's sort of trying to get away from that. And maybe that smiling for some reason helps him feel distance from that, because that was really odd, I thought, talking about the most traumatic thing that ever happened to him. And the thing that apparently a lot of this is based on, whatever's happening here. I think that's the root of it. That's one of the roots of it. He gets a little bit stressed, so we see a series of blinks, there are 2 double blinks and then a triple blink and then another double blink. And I think that's as he's being read the information about what he said in the book. And I think, again, come back to that spot where it may be painful for him to hear. He doesn't, obviously he wouldn't enjoy hearing about that. But I think that's why we're seeing the blink rate go up, way up on those flutters right there. And that's a way of eye blocking. Eye blocking is what we do when we hear something we don't want to hear. Sometimes we'll go like this. Sometimes we'll just close our eyes, or we'll bend our eyes. I think I've told this before, but there was a fellow named Doc Watson. He was a guitar player and he was blind. He was my dad's best friend. So as I grew up, he was always around the house. And when the women would leave the table after we'd all eat, my brother and I would start telling him these jokes that were just horrible, And my dad, before he'd get us settled down, as we started into them, Doc knew where these jokes were going. And he would, even though he'd never seen anything before, he thinks he remembers seeing something as a little kid, but he never, he hadn't seen his whole life. He would still block his eyes as that came up, and he's never seen anybody do that. So it must be some kind of natural thing we do, as maybe it's blocking part of our brain or something in our head. But I thought that was really interesting there. He doesn't want to hear that. So I think it may be painful for him. All right, and I'll leave it there.
In the book you write, he says, "They tried, darling boy. I'm afraid she didn't make it." These phrases remain in my mind like darts in a board, you say. Did you cry?
No, never shed a single tear at that point. I was in shock. You're 12 years old, sort of 7:30 in the morning, early. Your father comes in, sits on your bed, puts his hand on your knee and tells you there's been an accident. I couldn't believe.
And you write in the book that Pa didn't hug me. He wasn't great at showing emotions under normal circumstances, but his hand did fall once more on my knee and he said, "It's going to be okay." But after that, nothing was okay for a long time.
No, nothing was okay.
Harry says his memories of the next few days are fragmented, but he does remember this, greeting mourners outside Kensington Palace in London the day before his mother's funeral.
When you see those videos now, what do you think?
I think it's bizarre because I see William and me smiling. I remember the guilt that I felt.
Guilt about?
The fact that the people that we were meeting were showing more emotion than we were showing. Maybe more emotion than we even felt.
They were crying, but you weren't.
There was a lot of tears, and I talk about how wet people's hands were, and I couldn't understand it at first.
Their hands were wet.
Their hands were wet from wiping their own tears away. I do remember one of the strangest parts to it was taking flowers from people and then placing those flowers with the rest of them, as if I was some sort of middle person for their grief.
The files contain photographs of the crash scene. Why did you want to see it?
Mainly proof that she was in the car, proof that she was injured, and proof that the very paparazzi that chased her into the tunnel were the ones that were taking photographs of her lying half dead on the backseat of the car.
You write, "I hadn't been aware before this moment," talking about looking at the pictures of the crash scene, that the last thing Mummy saw on this earth was a flashbulb.
Yep.
That's what you saw in the pictures.
Mm-hmm. Well, the pictures showed the reflection of a group of photographers taking photographs through the window, and the reflection of the window was them.
All right, Chase, what do you got?
Two things are happening here in this clip. First, Harry is experiencing genuine emotion here. He's showing genuine contempt when he's talking about the paparazzi, and his lips come together after he mentions them. And this is called lip compression. When we squeeze the lips together, and it usually indicates withheld opinions or someone holding something back. The second thing here that's pretty big is that I think he's genuinely wanting proof as a child, because he's saying, is this real? Is there some ruse? Am I being tricked? As a child, I can understand that might be there. And wanting to see the accident really did happen. Super common, but the part he added on about the paparazzi, although the emotions are genuine, I think this was simply added on to this childhood memory. And there is a professor at, I think it's, how do you pronounce it, Mark? Leicester?
Leicester,
Yeah, University of Leicester. This researcher, Tim Dalgleish, working at the Cognition and Brain Sciences Unit in the UK, published this 18-point checklist to forensically analyze statements from children about whether or not they were fabricated or false memories. And Harry definitely hits several of these points here on this checklist for sure when it comes to that memory specifically, which is another reason I think that we can confirm things verbally too. And I'll throw the research down in the description if you're curious or you want to take a look. Scott, what do you got?
All right. Well, I'm going to talk about what his description of what happened in the book when it's being read to him about the last thing Mummy saw. He doesn't talk this way. His vernacular doesn't use the words as these aren't beautifully descriptive, but he doesn't use really descriptive words in a good way, like I just didn't do. Listen to how he describes the paparazzi and the reflection in the window and all that stuff. That could have been much better, because when he's talking about when he says the last thing Mummy saw, he doesn't make these similes or metaphors. He doesn't put those together ever. We've never heard him do that. The only time we hear that happen is in the writing. Quite often, when we're writing, we'll get up in our head and go, I think whatever it is, and you'll make it as wonderful as you can. But he wouldn't do it that way because his sentence structure isn't that way. Listen to the way he talks. It's a lot of little teeny words, and then he's got 2 or 3 big words. But the 2 or 3 big words are words that we all use. He's not descriptive like this. He's not that good at that. So I think the person who wrote the book, the ghostwriter, that strictly came from them. They said, what happened? He went through, and then the ghostwriter sits back and writes this big scene that he sees or she sees him going through, and to put it in the book to make it sound better, because he's not that kind of person. He doesn't talk like that. He doesn't see the world that way. The person who wrote this would see the world from a visual aspect. They'd be talking about how things look and how things do that. He's talking more from a kinesthetic point. He talks about how things feel constantly. That's his jumping off point. That's where the way he sees the world, from a kinesthetic point of view, whereas the writer sees things more from a visual point of view. Quite often they'll come from feelings too, depending on what they're writing about or what kind of author it is. But in this case, I think it's a person who sees things visually, and as they're setting up this scene, that's something he never would have said, and it wouldn't have come out of his mouth that way. And I don't think he would have written it that way either, because I don't think his brain is set up to do that, because he's not a big reader. He may say, I read all these, whatever. I don't think he's a big reader. I don't think he's very smart. If you listen to the way this guy talks, he's copying what he's grown up hearing. He's just using those same words. There's nothing been added to this, to the words he uses, the group of words, the vernacular he uses since he was young. This is the way a young British person talks, not in their 40s. I'm talking teenager, maybe 20 years old and down to maybe 15 years old, 13, 14, 15 years old. That's the way he speaks. And I think it goes back to maybe because that's when he had his problem when he was 11, I think, is when his mom got killed. Maybe that sort of put him in a state of arrest. But he's not using the language that someone his age should be using, and especially when it comes to descriptive situations, describing things. I don't think he's got that at all. Greg, what do you got?
Yeah, Chase, everything you brought up, regardless of whether the memory is real or not, it is real to him now, I think, regardless of how it was manufactured. And denial is the first thing that happens in loss. Any one of us who's lost someone close to us, first thing we do is deny it, and we try to figure out how it could possibly be not true. She was a person of means, and he talks about that. She could have disappeared. He didn't believe it. I think we also always point out that every time you open a memory, you edit it. And that can become more and more profound, especially as your hatred becomes more and more profound, because your mother died. Now you saw these pictures. Now they talk about her. And we'll hear later you sit around the breakfast table and talk about all that crap. Then that gets stronger and stronger. And if you want to see real full-blown contempt, you'll rarely see it more than here. Look at that facial expression with containment of emotion that Chase brought up, that lip compression. I'm not going to, it can be information, it can be emotion, but either way, it's containing something. In this case, I believe it's emotion. And then there's that full blown contempt as one side of his face raises. And then he does another lip compression and pulls both sides of his mouth back dramatically. When we did this thing for Tarek, your buddy there in Nashville, Scott, we did the thing for Dr. Phil. I remember looking at him and going, all I see is deception, 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 and making that disdain face. That's the most condemning face you can send to someone, and they can see it. I think what we're seeing here is that part of him, that second fracture, the fracture that here's what happened to my mother, and everybody knows it happened because it was out in pictures that everybody could look at. Mark, what do you got?
Yeah. So there we go. 5 for 5, more contempt, more disdain. Amazing to see. I just noticed this as we played that replay back. I didn't notice it the first time, but there is a single shoulder shrug on paparazzi that chased her. Single shoulder shrug. That will often denote an uncertainty around that. So is he uncertain that the paparazzi did chase her in. And there's the paparazzi were around, there's the paparazzi were back there, but the causation, and he'll go on to talk about the chain of events in a video coming up and their part in that chain. But there seems some uncertainty there around them potentially chasing her to her death. Interesting. By the way, a double shoulder shrug, which we may see, I think we maybe see him do a bit later. That will often denote well, that's the way it is. That's just, there's quite a nice little, not an emoji that you can get. That's kind of like this, hey, that's the way it is. Very different from the single shoulder shrug. Okay, here's what excites me most about this. He talks about the reflections in the windows. So he talks about this idea that he knew the paparazzi were there eventually because the photographs they take are of themselves taking photographs of his dying mother. So now, at this point, he's inviting the media to inspect his inspection of the media intrusion. And so I'm only telling you this because it just delights me. What a self-reflective hall of mirrors this is. It's like that scene in Enter the Dragon when there's all these kind of revolving mirrors going around and you can't tell anymore what's real, where the real adversary is and where the reflection of the adversary is. And only a superhero like Bruce Lee can actually, work it out at the last moment. But a fantastic hall of mirrors. Of course, the idea of the story of the hall of mirrors is if I could go back and do it all again, what would I do? That's Ebenezer Scrooge. That's Groundhog Day. It's often called the Hall of Mirrors narrative. If I could go back in time and do it all again, how would I change history? So again, speaks to me about his central narrative of his life at the moment seems to be, how do I repeat what happened to my mother and make it right? How do I challenge that death? That'll come back in a few videos' time as well, but that's all I got on that one.
Oh, Greg, man, you're in quick on that one.
There. It's the oil.
I give that to you.
It's the oil. He's only got a limited time.
Very slick.
Speaking of which, I'll be right back.
Before it sees its way through his system.
The files contain photographs of the crash scene. Why did you want to see it?
Mainly proof that she was in the car, proof that she was injured, and proof that the very paparazzi that chased her into the tunnel were the ones that were taking photographs of her lying half dead on the backseat of the car.
You write, I hadn't been aware before this moment, talking about looking at the pictures of the crash scene, that the last thing Mummy saw on this earth was a flashbulb.
Yep.
That's what you saw in the pictures?
Mm-hmm. Well, the pictures showed the reflection of a group of photographers taking photographs through the window, and the reflection of the window was them.
I want to go to the tunnel where my mom died.
I wanted to see whether it was possible, driving at the speed that Henry Paul was driving, that you could lose control of a car and plow into a pillar, killing almost everybody in that car. I need to take this journey. I need to ride the same route.
The same tunnel, the same speed.
All of it.
Your mother was going.
Yeah. Because William and I had already been told the event was like a bicycle chain. If you remove one of those chains, the end result would not have happened. And the paparazzi chasing was part of that. But yet, everybody got away with it.
I'm going to go first on this one because it's going to be the shortest one I've ever done. His mother was killed by a drunk driver. The guy was drunk. They were being chased, but he hit that pole. Take the drinking out of it, I don't think we'd be listening to this whining session today. Greg, what do you got?
Yeah, don't know if we would be listening to this whining session. It'd be a different whining session, I think, because I think it's just in his DNA. Look, the world is littered with lots of people who would be rulers who end up not being rulers, and they were second sons and that kind of thing. You can look back in history and find guys who accidentally get there and probably shouldn't have. Maybe this is a good thing. So I'll leave it at that for there. But he says basically there's one thing. This whole message is the paparazzi killed my mother and nobody did anything about it. When he says how fast your mother was going, he sets his jaw. We typically associate a set jaw with anger. And then there's that core message. The paparazzi forced her to go this fast, and then nobody did anything about it. And when he says that, you'll see anger, you'll see his teeth exposed, and then lip compression as he contains. I think this is part 3 of his mantra. They killed my mother, and nobody did a thing about it. Mark, what do you got?
Yeah, this is extraordinary because, look, in behavior, we're always essentially looking for patterns. We're looking for when patterns repeat. We're looking for when patterns break. And we're trying to look at what might be some of the potential meanings of those patterns remaining, continuing, or breaking. And how does that help us understand the lives that we lead and who's in our lives? He says, ride the same tunnel, the same speed. All of it. It's basically going, I want to relive that moment, that same tunnel and that same speed. And he nods his head. He shows anger as his jaw moves forward to almost display his bottom teeth, those teeth moving forward. And he illustrates, quite a strong illustrator of not really a bicycle chain. He's talking about a chain of events. And if one of the links were taken out, the chain wouldn't propel the engine anymore. It wouldn't be the same outcome. I think the unfortunate thing about this is he may well be trying to repeat the same tunnel at the same speed, the same chain of events, the same patterns, the same glare of the media on him to see whether he can survive this one. Can he be the person that lives through this one because his mother didn't live through this one? Look, that's a big extrapolation out of that. Can he travel at his mother's speed and survive this one? Because he's already got some of the elements in there. He's got a wife that he says people don't like, she's non-conformist. He's already divorced himself from the family. Again, all the things he says he's hounded by the paparazzi, though we're not able to see that in the detail that he gives. But he says it's true. Could be very unfortunate for him. Scott, what do you got on this one?
How do you want to associate?
Oh, Chase. I'm sorry,
nice.
Chase.
Like
What do you got, my friend?
So, you know what else is like a bicycle chain? Every single event in your life, every event. If you've ever dated or met someone, that was a bicycle chain. If you've ever done anything, that was a bicycle chain too. So we can call anything a bicycle chain that we want. And it makes sense to us hearing it like, oh, that makes sense for this event. But it's everything. It's every event. So again, more generalities, kind of hollow language here. But this video is great for training. You're going to see his eyes go into emotional accessing, which we talked to you about before. It's just down into his right when he's talking about people in the car being killed. It's a textbook example. And it's a good example of how fast we can spot an emotional detail in people that we talk to every day. And when he's initially talking about his desire to take this journey, two things are happening. I think this is the third video I've said there's two things going on. There's two things happening there. His eyes go down and toward the center, right down here to like 6 o'clock on the clock. And he uses a pronoun that might feel out of place if you were listening closely. He says, I need to take this journey. Maybe that's not a pronoun. I think it is. This journey, this suggests present tense. His language shifts completely. I need to, not I needed to. I need to take this journey. So present tense language, the eyes go down into the center. And I've seen this 10,000 times doing interviews. This is super common when somebody isn't necessarily reliving an event, but they're walking through that event in the present moment as if it were present. His language backs this up. Now, I want you to try to look for this when you're asking somebody about anything. If you see down center eye movement, you can shift your questions to present tense and get that person more into the scene. So instead of like, where were you? You say, where are you now? And what are you seeing now in the tunnel that you're doing this? You get that person more into the present moment right there in the scene.
I want to go to the tunnel. where my mom died.
I wanted to see whether it was possible, driving at the speed that Henry Paul was driving, that you could lose control of a car and plow into a pillar, killing almost everybody in that car. I need to take this journey. I need to ride the same route.
The same tunnel, the same speed.
All of it.
Your mother was going.
Yeah. Because William and I had already been told the event was like a bicycle chain. If you remove one of those chains, the end result would not have happened. And the paparazzi chasing was part of that. But yet, everybody got away with it. She was the villain. She was the third person in the marriage. She needed to rehabilitate her image.
You and your brother both directly asked your dad not to marry Camilla.
Yes.
Why?
We didn't think it was necessary. We thought that it was going to cause more harm than good, and that if he was now with his person, that surely that's enough. Why go that far when you don't necessarily need to? We wanted him to be happy, and we saw how happy he was with her. So at the time, it was, okay.
You wrote that she started a campaign in the British press to pave the way for a marriage, and you wrote, I even wanted Camilla to be happy. Maybe she'd be less dangerous if she was happy. Mm-hmm. How was she dangerous?
Because of the need for her to rehabilitate her image.
That made her dangerous?
That made her dangerous because of the connections that she was forging within the British press. And there was open willingness on both sides to trade of information. And with a family built on hierarchy, and with her on the way to being Queen Consort, there was going to be people or bodies left in the street because of that.
Harry says over the years he was one of those bodies. He accuses Camilla and even his father at times of using him or William to get better tabloid coverage for themselves. Prince Harry writes, Camilla, quote, sacrificed me on her personal PR altar.
If you are led to believe as a member of the family that being on the front page, having positive headlines, positive stories written about you is going to improve your reputation or increase the chances of you being accepted as monarch by the British public, then that's what you're going to do.
All right, Mark, what do you got?
Yeah, his person. And then we see contempt there. He's talking about Charles's new wife, Camilla. And there's a sniff here which is out of the baseline. His sniffs are dried up, I think, because of the pseudoepinephrine that was most likely going on there. But here we get a sniff again, and I think it's an expressive sniff of some kind of disgust that goes with this, or maybe, actually, no, I think it's dismissal, a sniff of dismissal, because often we say, well, that's nothing to sniff at, that's nothing to dismiss. So I think that the sniff there is he's dismissing the idea of Camilla marrying his father. So it fits the words that he's saying there. I love the imagery here. Again, the paralanguage here. Bodies left in the street. He was one of the bodies left in the street. We know from decent societies that when you go to war, one of the things that you're allowed to do is collect your dead. Or you go and collect your dead. You do not leave your dead in the streets. And so by him saying, hey, I'm one of the bodies left in the streets, basically he's saying this was subhuman, what was going on here. And it continues as well, because he talks about Camilla, and they show the image that they put with this, the interview makers put with this, is a very cold, asymmetrical picture of Camilla. So the interview is really helping him out here, portray her as cold, asymmetrical, along with his dehumanizing imagery there. And he finishes it off with an image of being sacrificed on the altar. So an image of human sacrifice, of almost satanic abuse that went on around him. Like, fantastic work, Harry. You can't write this stuff, but it certainly happens in your head. Greg, what do you got on this one?
Yeah, Mark, I think that's more than a sniff. I think it's a snort of derision. I think it's, he rolls that lip up, exposes his tooth, and does that all at the same time. That's the most we've seen out of this guy the entire time. I think it's more than just a sniff. I think it's a powerful condemning of Camilla. I had hope for him in this one. He starts off, this is the single clearest statement he's made when he starts talking about her. He's actually answering detailed questions. I'm like, why now? Well, clearly because he has something to say about her. Then when he says it would do more good than good, more bad than good, and he was already happy, well, he might have said the same thing about you marrying your wife. That's not how life works. You don't get to condemn the other guy. Given that he's going to be king, that is much more complex, and I understand all that. So what's the difference? The dad can't do this, but I can. When he does that absolute disdain and contempt and snort of derision, you can't miss that. And that, they don't have anything going on. Now, here's the interesting piece where it starts to fall apart. I'm hoping, number one, I'll go back and say, hey, I have something in common with him other than red hair. We use our hands a lot in the same kind of gestures as we're speaking. Maybe it's a ginger thing. But as you watch him, he does that up at the time, and it was okay, does a single shoulder shrug. And he then stops answering complex questions. If I was saying Camilla did this to me, I would give you examples of that. Look, she did this to me. She threw me under a bus this way. She had my father do this. Instead, he goes back to your point, Chase. He talks in these simple, open-ended kind of, oh, she's just a monster. She's just a monster. Well, what kind of monster is she? I want to know that. When I hear this, I would be all over him and climbing on him to get him to answer those questions. Here's the problem. He's a believer. He's a believer in what he's doing. I don't think he's lying. I think he's a believer in what he's doing. So all that cognitive dissonance just disappears for him. He can drink it like cooking oil. Chase, what do you got?
Yeah, I love it. Let's look at the narrative here. So somebody with the need to rehabilitate their image is dangerous. And it's more dangerous because they know people in the press. And that's literally this video. And I think at this point, they have to be doing this on purpose. There is no way they can't see this is just him looking into a mirror at this point. There's no possible way they can't see this. And at the end of this clip, I think it gets better with him saying, and I'm paraphrasing, if you believe the media is going to boost your reputation and earn you power, that's what you're going to do. I think that's literally a mirror. And if you watch these videos again, if you can stand it, and I want you to notice how negative events and people are something Harry uses his left hand to gesture about, gesturing outward away from himself, and he uses his right hand most often to gesture about positive things. And it's a recurring trait of his behavior. And you might spot it in a few videos where he's talking about his wife. And you can take a look, maybe make your own conclusions there. That's all I got. Scott?
All right. So check this out. He and his brother talk to his dad and say, look, don't marry her. You shouldn't marry her. He thinks it's okay for him to tell somebody not to marry somebody and not to be into their person or their wife. But what he's complaining about is when they're doing it to him, right? Because he told his dad, we're not into her. We don't want you to marry her. And his dad and his brother and his family said, look, man, this probably isn't the girl for you or the woman for you, however you want to say it. I think that says so much. Another thing, when he says, she sacrificed me on her personal PR altar. Again, he doesn't talk like that. When has he brought religion up before? Granted, again, we all know when we're writing something, we've all written books, you write so it sounds like you're a lot smarter and all that. I don't think he has the capacity to think along those lines or to say something along those lines. And to see that the juxtaposition of where he's down here, she's doing this to him, but it's like she's sacrificing him on her altar of public relation. Come on. No, he doesn't think like that. He didn't say that. And I think what's going on here from a body language perspective, he's speaking really strong. Again, his tone is really tight and round, and his cadence is clipping right along. He's ready for this one. This is almost a rehearsed answer. I think, and the sniffs, as far as the sniffs go, they quit a while back. Remember, he quit sniffing. So I think you guys are right on that. I think that sniff. I think you guys nailed that right there. His movements have gotten closer to his torso. They're going out, but his elbows aren't going out as far. They go out some, but not as far as they've been going out. This is all because he's thinking about what he's going to say. That's the impression I have. He knows he's got the concept of what he's going to say. Not that he's rehearsed this word for word, but he's ready for this answer. He's ready to go for it. And again, we all know he had a ghostwriter, but I don't think he's read this book. I don't think he's gotten a look at it yet, because he wouldn't talk this way. He'd say, hang on, man, I don't talk that way. Unless he's so simple, he would go, wow, this is really making me look smart, and not being able to put together that it doesn't sound like him at all. Not even a little bit. All right, we good?
Yeah.
Oh, Greg, that was a hard one, man. Yeah, Mark, but I'm going to give it to you, Mark. I'm going to
I'm going to distribute that. I think I'm going to distribute that. Normally I would take it, but I'm going to distribute that. I'm going to have a moment of unique magnanimity around that and distribute it. It was just beautiful. Beautiful teamwork there.
You're such a
obviously it's mine. I mean, obviously, but.
All right. That's very kind of you.
She was the villain. She was the third person in the marriage. She needed to rehabilitate her image.
You and your brother both directly asked your dad not to marry Camilla.
Yes.
Why?
We didn't think it was necessary. We thought that it was going to cause more harm than good, and that if he was now with his person, that surely that's enough. Why go that far when you don't necessarily need to? We wanted him to be happy, and we saw how happy he was with her. So at the time, it was okay.
You wrote that she started a campaign in the British press to pave the way for a marriage, and you wrote, I even wanted Camilla to be happy. Maybe she'd be less dangerous if she was happy. Mm-hmm. How was she dangerous?
Because of the need for her to rehabilitate her image.
That made her dangerous?
That made her dangerous because of the connections that she was forging within the British press. And there was open willingness on both sides to trade of information. And with a family built on hierarchy, and with her on the way to being Queen Consort, there was going to be people or bodies left in the street because of that.
Harry says over the years he was one of those bodies. He accuses Camilla and even his father at times of using him or William to get better tabloid coverage for themselves. Prince Harry writes, Camilla, quote, sacrificed me on her personal PR altar.
If you are led to believe as a member of the family that being on the front page, having positive headlines, positive stories written about you is going to improve your reputation or increase the chances of you being accepted as monarch by the British public, then that's what you're going to do.
In his book, Harry writes that when he introduced Meghan Markle to his family in 2016, his father initially took a liking to her, but William was skeptical, disdainfully referring to Meghan as an American actress. Though Harry doesn't specify who, he says other members of the royal family were uneasy as well.
Right from the beginning, before they even had a chance to get to know her. And the UK press jumped on that, and here we are.
And what was that based on, that mistrust?
The fact that she was American, an actress, divorced, black, biracial, with a black mother. Those were just 4 of the typical stereotypes that becomes a feeding frenzy for the British press.
But all those things within the family also were sources of mistrust.
Yes, my family read the tabloids. It's laid out at breakfast when everyone comes together. So whether you walk around saying you believe it or not, it's still leaving an imprint in your mind. So if you have that judgment based on a stereotype right at the beginning, it's very, very hard to get over that. And a large part of it for the family, but also the British press and numerous other people, is like, he's changed. She must be a witch. He's changed. As opposed to, yeah, I did change. And I'm really glad I changed. Because rather than getting drunk, falling out of clubs, taking drugs, I'd now found the love of my life. And I now have the opportunity to start a family with her.
Soon after their relationship became public, Harry insisted on putting out a statement condemning some of the tabloid coverage of Meghan and what he called, quote, the racial undertones of comment pieces.
You write that your dad and your brother, William, were furious with you for doing that. Why?
They felt as though it made them look bad. They felt as though they didn't have a chance or weren't able to do that for their partners. what Meghan had to go through was similar in some part to what Kate and what Camilla went through. Very different circumstances. But then you add in the race element, which was what the British press jumped on straight away. I went into this incredibly naive. I had no idea the British press was so bigoted. Hell, I was probably bigoted before the relationship with Meghan.
You think you were bigoted before the relationship with Meghan?
I don't know. Put it this way, I didn't see what I now see.
All right, Greg, what do you got?
Yeah, this is interesting because he pauses before he says black. Different cadence than everything else he said. So that matters to him that he brings that up. We do that when we are trying to say, hey, I know this person. We may say, I was having lunch with Dr. Phil. And you may say something like that to pause to give effect. Call it a pregnant pause in my old world. And that's how we find things. You start to ask yourself, does he think he's becoming some kind of a hero, some kind of an anti-prince? Something is going on in this guy's head. And I'd love to ask him a handful of questions that he's never going to get asked. Look, if you hate what they are, why do you want to be one of them? I don't mean the family part. If you hate what they are, why do you want to be a duke? Well, probably because there's money associated with it or something else. Is the only reason I can imagine. But it's that cognitive dissonance again. Now, he also talks about they're reading these. Now, I can only imagine sitting around the breakfast table reading the latest dirt on your family. That might be okay for an adjusted person, but for somebody who's got cracks under the layers, not a good thing. So if every morning he's hearing bad things about Diana or bad things about his mom or his dad or his brother, then yeah, that's going to create a bunch more fractures that are not as easy to see. He also soft pedals when he says probably bigoted to see how the guy will respond. And when the guy responds, he says, I don't know. And then he says, I didn't see. There's stuff I didn't see before. He does what we talked about before. He leans back in the chair and he does that newfound knowledge arrogance where he's looking down his nose. He's got his head back, his chin up, and smug lips. Chase, only thing he's missing is his closed-eyed talking when he does it. But he's got it there. And then he goes on to talk about something I brought up last time I watched him, the Baader-Meinhof syndrome, where when you buy a new Volkswagen, you see Volkswagens everywhere. Once you get used to a certain thing, you pay a lot more attention to it. Scott, what do you got?
All right. I agree with you. This is where he's teaching us something. He's being all smug because he's teaching us about these things that he knows about and understands, but we just don't. You know, his cadence is just clipping right along. His tone is strong, and he's telling us exactly what he thinks. However, this is where he steps in poop, because he says, I might not have understood this before now. He said, there are some things, I probably didn't see, in other words, when he starts talking about that. And I think, mark my words, somebody's going to come along with a picture or a video, or somebody's going to come along with a story and say, hey man, this guy used to talk like this. Remember they used to just cancel people from Twitter when they said something 15 years ago? That's what's going to get him, because he's admitting in a way that he said some things he shouldn't have said, that he did some things he shouldn't have done. He thought in a way he shouldn't have thought. But now that he knows better, it's okay, because now he knows better. Well, that would be for everybody, even the 15 years ago people that got canceled for saying something horrible they shouldn't have, that you wouldn't say now. So I think that might be coming. I think that might be in the cards for him, and he's setting up to protect against that. That's what it looks like to me. It's sort of a move to a defense move to protect himself. Mark, what do you got?
Yeah, I think you're right. There's a number of defenses going on here, because he's having to backpedal on his inference that his family, the royal family, were racist. I think it's fair to say that in his in the interview with Oprah, that was inferred. It was inferred by an omission of anybody saying, oh, by the way, we're not saying that they were ever racist. They were probably unconsciously biased. That was never said in the interview. It was inferred that there was racism. Nobody ever jumped in to go, don't misconstrue, by the way, that we're saying that the royal family were racist in any way. That was not the case. So there's kind of a lie of omission that goes on there. He's now having to backpedal on that one. And he's doing it by a logic of that the royal family were unconsciously influenced by the British press because they read the tabloids at the breakfast table. And so they carry that around in their mind. And so, of course, they're going to be, and he says bigoted. Now, bigoted isn't racist. Bigoted means that there's a certain group that you're against and people are able to sign up to that group. Whereas racism, like, you can't decide what race you are. That's like you're either that race or you're not that race. And therefore, if you're racist, you're picking on something that somebody's inherently born with. Bigotry is more about, well, you know, we don't like that group that is an in-group. So he's having to backpedal on all of this, and ultimately what this is doing for him is just building a level of mistrust around the public for anything that he says. I'm going to use a very, very popular psychological term at the moment, but ultimately you might look at this and go, he's gaslighting people, because we all kind of sit there and go, no, I think you really did infer that the royal family were racist. And what he's doing now is going, no, didn't do that. And so what we get with a very recent interview on ITV was literally kind of drop jaw from the interviewer going, you're kind of now completely switching your narrative. Now he also accuses others of using maleficent kind of supernatural metaphors for females, like the whole kind of witch idea, the whole kind of, you know, people said she was a witch and well, hang on, in your book, which you either wrote or you didn't write, you were saying that you were sacrificed on the altar of PR, which is ultimately calling a female some kind of devil worshipping kind of satanic entity. So, you know, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. Of course, we don't, it's what's happening now is it's, because of the behavior here, is it's utterly untrustworthy. And the British public and most public just don't like that kind of behavior. They like some kind of element of people do what they say and they stick by these ideas. He's all over the place now. Chase, what do you got on this one?
Yeah, show me a time when he doesn't communicate in insinuations. It's just all... And that's the cool thing about never actually communicating a single piece of information. You can always go back and say, no, I never said that directly. So he's saying judgment and stereotypes. He's using his left hand, large right-handed gesture about Meghan and the love of my life. And there's something strange here that's starting to become a pattern, and you can see it here in this video. Right after he says, I found the love of my life, there is a weird pause of discomfort. You do not have to be a profiler or anything to see this. You'll feel it when you see this come up. It's right when he says, I found the love of my life. And when he says opportunity to start a family with her, his blink rate, which is how often we blink, it's a measurement of stress, goes through the roof. And I think there is some serious internal disagreement with him saying those words. And we've seen this behavior toward her in several videos. And Scott, maybe you're right. Maybe there's a bleak future for the relationship. Who knows?
In his book, Harry writes that when he introduced Meghan Markle to his family in 2016, his father initially took a liking to her. But William was skeptical, disdainfully referring to Meghan as an American actress. Though Harry doesn't specify who, he says other members of the royal family were uneasy as well.
Right from the beginning, before they even had a chance to get to know her. And the UK press jumped on that, and here we are.
And what was that based on, that mistrust?
The fact that she was American, an actress, divorced, black, biracial, with a black mother. Those were just 4 of the typical stereotypes that becomes a feeding frenzy for the British press.
But all those things within the family also were sources of mistrust.
Yes, you know, my family read the tabloids. You know, it's laid out at breakfast when everyone comes together. So whether you walk around saying you believe it or not, it's still leaving an imprint in your mind. So if you have that judgment based on a stereotype right at the beginning, it's very, very hard to get over that. And a large part of it for the family, but also the British press and numerous other people, is like, he's changed. She must be a witch. He's changed. As opposed to, yeah, I did change, and I'm really glad I changed. because rather than getting drunk, falling out of clubs, taking drugs, I'd now found the love of my life, and I now had the opportunity to start a family with her.
Soon after their relationship became public, Harry insisted on putting out a statement condemning some of the tabloid coverage of Meghan and what he called, quote, the racial undertones of comment pieces.
You write that your dad and your brother, William, were furious with you for doing that. Why?
They felt as though it made them look bad. They felt as though they didn't have a chance or weren't able to do that for their partners. What Meghan had to go through was similar in some part to what Kate and what Camilla went through. Very different circumstances. But then you add in the race element, which was what the British press jumped on straight away. I went into this incredibly naive. I had no idea the British press was so bigoted. Hell, I was probably bigoted before the relationship with Meghan.
You think you were bigoted before the relationship with Meghan?
I don't know. Put it this way, I didn't see what I now see.
Did you ever try to meet with William and Kate to try to diffuse the tension?
Yep.
How did that meeting go?
Not particularly well.
In early 2019, Harry writes the rancor between William and him exploded at Harry's cottage on the grounds of Kensington Palace.
Your arguments with your brother became physical.
It was a build-up of frustration, I think, on his part. It was at a time where he was being told certain things by people within his office, and at the same time he was consuming a lot of the tabloid press, a lot of the stories. And he had a few issues which were based not on reality. And I was defending my wife, and he was coming for my wife. She wasn't there at the time, but through the things that he was saying, I was defending myself, and we moved from one room into the kitchen, and his frustrations were growing and growing and growing. He was shouting at me, I was shouting back at him. It wasn't nice, it wasn't pleasant at all. And he snapped, and he pushed me to the floor.
He knocked you over?
He knocked me over. I landed on the dog bowl.
You cut your back?
Yeah, I cut my back. I didn't know about it at the time. But yeah, he apologized afterwards. It was a pretty nasty experience, but...
He asked you not to tell anybody, not to tell Meghan?
Yeah, and I wouldn't have done. I didn't until she saw on my back. She goes, "What's that?" I was like, what? I actually didn't know what she was talking about. And I looked in the mirror, I was like, well, because I hadn't seen it.
Put him to the floor.
All right. All right. Here we go. Mark, what do you got?
Yeah. Look, there's something odd here because he withholds information from his wife in favor of his brother. I don't know. I just don't get that. I don't get what's going on. I don't get what's going on there. He says, Chase, he says nothing in this. The only certain things he says are that he was pushed on the floor and he hit the dog bowl and he cut his back. Those are the only definite things. The other stuff is like a few issues, there were a few issues not based on reality. Like, tell that to the judge. Stand in front of a judge and go, Your Honor, there were a few things just not based on reality. The judge will go, what are you talking about? Number one. Number two, what are you talking about? Number 3, 4, 5, and 6. What exactly are you talking about? This is, by the way, 9 for 9 now. Disdain. Disdain for I was defending my wife. And then disdain. So I'm trying to work out what that disdain is about. With the best will in the world, we would say, okay, must be disdain for his brother, or contempt, rather, for his brother, for forcing him into a situation where he has to defend his wife. I hope it's nothing different than that. If I was defending my wife, I'd feel quite proud that that's what I'm doing. I would feel very positive about that kind of thing. It feels to me like he has a hard time delivering positive emotions around some of the things that many of us would normally deliver positives around, rather than the constant disdain and contempt. Scott, what do you got on this one?
I'll tell you what happened, because I'm familiar with this. I've seen this 1,000 times. Here's what happened. He was fussing with his brother, with William. William pushed him down. He fell into the dog bowl and it hurt his back. William jumped on top of him, put his arm down on top of him, grabbed his left hand, started hitting him in the face with it and saying, "Why are you hitting yourself? Why are you hitting yourself? Why are you hitting yourself?" And then when he starts crying, then William says, "Who's your boss? Who's the boss of you? Say it. Who's the boss of you? Who's the boss of you?" And he says, "You are." And he says, "You're right. I am." And then he pushes up, he gets up, and then he sticks his hand out to pull him up. And when he does, Harry grabs for his hand, and when he does, he brings in all of his fingers and his thumb, and all he left is his index finger. So Harry grabs his index finger and he pulls it, and William and he goes, "That's why I'm going to be the king." Chase, what do you got?
My father was being told certain things by people. That was the greatest line. Certain things by people. I would love to hear that in court, too.
Yeah.
I think it's great. This is more of mistakes were made, but not by me mentality here. That's all it is. If you sum up his entire documentary footage and this interview, it would be, I'm fully recovered. I did a few silly little things in the past. I don't make mistakes currently or ever in the future, but everyone in the royal family does make mistakes. They are the ones that are doing everything wrong. There's contempt at mentioning Meghan here, which I think is strange. Maybe it was defending her. Maybe it was the brother. I don't know. We're not mind readers. But he also adopted some of Meghan's mannerisms here, and you'll see it in this video because he smiles when he thinks the detail about the story makes you more adorable, more relatable, and this is not his baseline in normal conversation. He's only started doing this recently. So like Greg talks about this on a regular basis. We collect things and we collect behavior. Scott, you do too, especially about accents and things. I think that's what we're seeing. That's all I got.
Greg, what do you got?
Greg, what do you got?
Yeah, so this is a softball pitch. I start to wonder, Mark, is he smarter than I think he is and realizes I better not talk too much trash about the two people who control a lot of resource. I'm not talking about, look, he can be Oprah's friend and all that. There's a little bit of difference between that and being the single largest landowner on earth and having duchies that you can provide people space with and give them income. There's a ton of stuff that makes, maybe that's why he's not being more content driven. I don't know. Maybe it's just the way his little brain is worked out and that's what he's gotten away with. But he does. He goes into an internal voice, that down left look as he's thinking about what to say, and his eyes narrow as he's talking about his brother building up frustration. Then he says things like he was, talking about him. And then he says certain things, but never says a certain thing out of any of it. He just said certain things were a problem. Okay, which certain things, knucklehead? Then lots of long vowels and the internal voice again, that looking down left, as he starts to talk about defending my wife. I was defending myself. And then the first time we hear him contribute in any way to this is when he says, I was shouting back. And you see him raise his forehead in a request for approval. I got a feeling this was probably heated. There's some stuff going on. He might have done something stupid. Who knows what happened? Maybe you're right, Scott. Maybe it was just a tussle. Who knows? And then my other piece that makes me wonder about it is he has to include the dog bowl after he tells you the story. And then when he says, and he said he knows it sounds like it's not true, so he has to show you a little bit more. There's emotion at nasty. Look, I think the guy, I hope that he quietly goes off into the Neverland and we don't do this anymore. But yeah, this guy is his own worst enemy.
Did you ever try to meet with William and Kate to try to diffuse the tension?
Yep.
How did that meeting go?
Not particularly well.
In early 2019, Harry writes the rancor between William and him exploded at Harry's cottage on the grounds of Kensington Palace.
Your arguments with your brother became physical.
It was a build-up of frustration, I think, on his part. It was at a time where he was being told certain things by people within his office, and at the same time he was consuming a lot of the tabloid press, a lot of the stories. And he had a few issues which were based not on reality. And I was defending my wife, and he was coming for my wife. She wasn't there at the time. But through the things that he was saying, I was defending myself, and we moved from one room into the kitchen. and his frustrations were growing and growing and growing. He was shouting at me, I was shouting back at him. It wasn't nice, it wasn't pleasant at all. And he snapped, and he pushed me to the floor.
He knocked you over.
He knocked me over. I landed on the dog bowl.
You cut your back.
Yeah, I cut my back. I didn't know about it at the time. But yeah, he apologized afterwards. It was a pretty nasty experience, but...
He asked you not to tell anybody, not to tell Meghan.
Yeah, and I wouldn't have done. I didn't until she saw on my back. She goes, "What's that?" I was like, what? I actually didn't know what she was talking about. And I looked in the mirror, I was like, well, because I hadn't seen it. So now, trying to speak a language that perhaps they understand, I will sit here and speak truth to you with the words that come out of my mouth, rather than using someone else, an unnamed source, to feed in lies or a narrative to a tabloid media that literally radicalizes its readers to then potentially cause harm to my family, my wife, my kids.
Last month, the British tabloid The Sun published a vicious column about Meghan, written by a TV host.
He said, "I hate her. At night, I'm unable to sleep as I lie there grinding my teeth and dreaming of the day where she is made to walk naked through the streets of every town in Britain while the crowds chant shame and throw lumps of excrement at her." Did that surprise you?
Did it surprise me? No. Is it shocking? Yes. I mean, thank you for proving our point.
Has there been any response from the palace?
No, and that comes a point when silence is betrayal.
All right, Greg, what do you got?
I'm going to be very short on this one. Speak truth. At least he didn't say speak my truth. He spared me that. So he's going to speak truth. This is the same summary I brought up the first time we covered this guy. The family is evil because they're in bed with the media. They killed his mother and they were not punished. I think this guy's stuck in this. I'm not even going to cover anybody. He's stuck in this 12-year-old entitled, stupid, and arrogant process. Do I know how smart he is? No, he might be brilliant, but he's not, surely not using his horsepower if he's brilliant. And he's becoming a pawn of the grandest sort. If you really, really wanted to hide in plain sight, you got an uncle who would hide you like a fat tree. All you have to do is stand by and watch what Andrew does, and you'll be fine. No, he had to do something more dramatic. Chase, what do you got?
Yeah, I think this video is him saying, yes, I'm using the press, but only because they will understand it more. And when he says silence is betrayal, this is from a Dr. Martin Luther King speech about Vietnam, I think. And when many times when people invoke these quotes about other people, they're secretly telling you something about themselves. In many cases, when you hear this, you're secretly hearing the justification of someone's actions and not what they actually believe about the other person. I think in this case, my opinion, of course, this whole video is just opinion. In this case, I think you're hearing him telling you that if he didn't speak up, he's betraying an ideal or he's betraying a person. So he is betraying someone if he didn't speak up. He's showing you how noble his actions are. We don't know who it is, but we hear the hidden meaning here. And you can mostly bet on this because every mistake he's ever made is wrapped in, I learned from that, I was trying to help, or they did it first. Those three things, every single one. That's all I got. Mark?
Yeah, I mean, what was that last clip before this one, other than just unnamed sources saying unknowable stuff? So to accuse others of using unnamed sources begs belief. The irony is always thick with this one. Okay, nice pick up on that quote, Chase. Silence or omission is many things. Sometimes omission is a lie. Sometimes omission is acceptance of something. Sometimes not saying something is brave. Sometimes not saying something is cowardice. I mean, just that it is always a betrayal is not accurate. That's just not accurate. Now, look, he says, look, thank you for proving my point. Upward inflection, which means he's not quite certain that it has proved his point, because what part does it prove? You're proving a point with a piece that Jeremy Clarkson wrote, who is well known for just being just doing extreme stuff. This is somebody who will have his own house blown up for the TV just for fun, just to make it. He's a barnstormer. Like, he's going to do, Clarkson will do whatever it takes to create a fun fair and get a crowd around him and get people looking at an extreme spectacle. And so Clarkson is not a good example of this. And in fact, because he doesn't watch Game of Thrones, I don't either. I can understand why. I don't particularly like it, but I did research what Clarkson wrote enough to know that he was alluding to a specific scene in Game of Thrones, which is a walk of shame, where a woman is paraded through the streets and excrement and other stuff is thrown at her. And actually, that device was criticized mainly for being a cheap device in order to win favor with an unlikable character. And so it's interesting that Clarkson used that idea anyway. I don't think he tried to use it in that term, but ultimately, that device did win favor for Harry's wife because it was so extreme. Everybody went, that's too much. That's too much. We don't dislike her that much. We're not saying that. And so actually, that image worked in his favor. I don't think Clarkson apologized, but I think the Sun apologized for it. And why would the palace have any view on it at all in public anyway? Extraordinary. Scott, what you got on this one?
All right, just got one thing to talk about here, and it's not body language. When he's talking about silence being betrayal and all that, the royal family isn't even putting out anything about themselves. They're not defending themselves. And he's mad because they're not defending his wife. They're not even defending themselves against him. How can he be mad that they're not defending her when they're not defending themselves? This whole thing makes no sense to me. This is where it just kind of fizzles away. And it's just a point where he's, like you're saying, Mark, it's just nothing there. He's just talking about all this stuff that just, where is it? Who's saying what? I don't understand what we're talking about through half of this. It just makes no sense whatsoever.
So now, trying to speak a language that perhaps they understand, I will sit here and speak truth to you with the words that come out of my mouth, rather than using someone else, an unnamed source, to feed in lies or a narrative to a tabloid media that literally radicalizes its readers to then potentially cause harm to my family, my wife, my kids.
Last month, the British tabloid The Sun published a vicious column about Meghan, written by a TV host.
He said, "I hate her. At night, I'm unable to sleep as I lie there grinding my teeth and dreaming of the day where she is made to walk naked through the streets of every town in Britain while the crowds chant shame and throw lumps of excrement at her." Did that surprise you?
Did it surprise me? No. Is it shocking? Yes. I mean, thank you for proving our point.
Has there been any response from the palace?
No, and that comes a point when silence is betrayal.
Mark, what do you think's happening so far in all this then?
Oh my God, what is happening so far in all of this? It's an extraordinary irony. I think the unfortunate thing is here that he's being used by the media in the way that he thinks he doesn't want to be used by the media. Netflix is the media. It's the most powerful media out there. It's, the moment you say, well, no, I'm in control of this thing. No, you're not. You're not at all. Of course you're not. You're not in control in any way whatsoever. So, again, the irony just begs belief. Chase.
So, I agree. In the Amber Heard trial, the whole entire world seemed to be on Team Johnny for a reason that's deep in our psychology. When we watch celebrities and royals, there's a hidden desire that we want to know they're human like us. We want to know they're flawed, they're imperfect, and it gives us a little bit of permission to make mistakes. It makes our mistakes a little more okay if they aren't perfect. I don't have to be perfect. And there's a weird history of presenting this image of perfection in politics. But when somebody's flawed, we like them more. We admonish this fake perfection. And as a society, we flock toward imperfect people. Look at Joe Rogan and Tom Hanks, Johnny Depp, Drew Barrymore. We can be human. You can be human. Everyone is screwed up. All four of us, everybody you know, and the Royals, we're all screwed up. It's okay to be human. And I think people are attracted to that. And we're the exact opposite when somebody tries to be perfect. Greg?
Yeah, I think whatever his social justice cause is, I think he's missing the boat. If he were going after something truly to take away the media's ability to wage war on his family, he would take a very different approach. Instead, he's just handing them data. And what he's coming across as is just the biggest whiny man I've seen in a long, long time. I know what his next job should be. He should lead the band Whinging Ginger. That'd be a great one for him. Scott, what do you got?
I agree. Like I was saying earlier, what is he fussing about? If you're going to come out and say somebody said something, say who said it and say what they said, and let's move on. This is getting old, and I think I think people are going to get tired of this really quick. I mean, we're horrifically tired. It's excruciating to go through all this. It's the worst, and there's nothing there. And when it starts dawning on people that there really is nothing there, they've never pinpointed anything, I think it's all going to go away. The excitement for them anyway. I don't think they'll be able to sell much of anything anymore. So they better be collecting all that money now, which apparently they are. That's just my opinion. I don't know. But we'll see what happens. All right, fellas, I think this is another good one, and we'll see you next time.
So what do you got? You know what?